Hey everybody, coming at you from the Microtel Inn and Suites in Franklin, North Carolina. Got off the trail at Rock Gap just yesterday. Today we're taking a zero. It's day 20, so I thought I'd go ahead and give you an update. Days 10 and 11 we ended up taking a zero due to the bad weather that I mentioned in my last video. It turns out it was a really good idea. There was people that had some beginning stages of frostbite on their fingers, and there was one guy that I know of that had to get medevaced out of the mountains because of hypothermia, so we definitely made the right call. So day 12, the way we got back to Unicoi Gap from Hiawassee, which is about 10 miles away, was we started hitchhiking, and a guy had picked us up and he thought we were going to Dix Creek Gap, which is another spot that you can get off to come into Hiawassee. And he was unable to take us back to Unicoi Gap, but he gave us a ride down to the Budget Inn up the street, and we were able to get on a shuttle, and that shuttle took us. They run at 9 and 11 a.m. and luckily, even though we weren't staying there, they were nice enough to let us ride the shuttle back to Unicoi Gap, you know, at no charge.
Heard a lot of injuries, but I haven't heard any deaths or anything on the trail this year.
So day 12, when we got back to Unicoi Gap, we started climbing out of the gap. You go over Rocky Mountain and then you go over Tray Mountain, and the grade wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. It was actually not too bad of a hike. May have something to do with the fact that we had pretty fresh legs from taking 2.5 days off in town.
Pretty good view. Look at that mountain over there, man.
So on day 13, the plan was to hike from Tray Mountain Shelter to Deep Gap Shelter. The hike wasn't all that bad. I mean, it's still pretty much up and down. But once you get down into Addie's Gap, you immediately start climbing what's called Kelly's Knob, which is extremely steep, and it goes on for a little over a mile. So that was a little bit of a shock to the system. I feel like I wasn't really warned for that, but got up it, and then with all the rain and snow melt that had been taking place, the descent coming off of that off of Kelly Knob was extremely muddy. I actually tried to take a couple of pictures of it, but the pictures just didn't do it any justice. It was probably 2 to 3 inches of mud, and it was a very steep grade trying to go down, and it was one of those days that we actually ended up you know, looking for wet rocks and wet roots for traction. And if you do any hiking, you know that that's never a good day. So on day 14, we decided to go from Deep Gap Shelter to Dix Creek Gap, where we were able to get off the trail and spend the night at the Top of Georgia hostel. It's just a half a mile up the road. Luckily, when we got into Dix Creek Gap, there was people doing trail magic. So we were able to get hamburgers, hot dogs, chips, drinks. It was amazing. And they actually weren't planning on doing the trail magic at Dix Creek Gap that day. They had went to set up at Unicoi Gap, which is a gap right before Dix Creek Gap, and somebody else had been doing trail magic there. So we got lucky, and these folks actually moved up to Dix Creek Gap, and we were able to take advantage of it. So thank you very much for doing that. The Top of Georgia hostel was actually a really nice place. It was really well run, organized, very clean. I do recommend it. It wasn't very expensive. I think it was like $25 for a bunk, and then $5 and they do your laundry for you. But it was a real cool place. A lot of good hikers there, had a good time. I definitely recommend the place. Day 15, the plan was to go from Top of Georgia hostel into Bly Gap. Top of Georgia actually gave us a ride back to Dix Creek Gap. It's only a half mile, but it was still nice of them to give us a ride. They dropped us off, I think it was at 9 a.m. So we went from Top of Georgia hostel, you know, to the Gap, and then started hiking towards Bly Gap. Now, Bly Gap is the very first gap that you come to when you cross into North Carolina. So that day we actually did finish Georgia and crossed into North Carolina, and we camped right there at Bly Gap. Day 16, the plan was to go from Bly Gap to Standing Indian Shelter, and Let me tell you, the first couple of climbs in North Carolina are no joke. They're extremely steep. People say that Georgia and the first part of North Carolina are very difficult, and that's absolutely true. Now, once you get about a mile before Standing Indian Shelter, that's when the trail just really chills out. It really, for the last 20 miles or so that we've been hiking to get here into Franklin, it's been really mellow trail, with the exception of going up Albert Mountain, which is very steep. It's rock crawling. There's a lot of places where you can basically just stick your arm out and touch the trail in front of you. It's that steep. Okay, so the plan for day 17 was to go from Standing Indian Shelter to Carter Gap Shelter. We started the day by going up and over Standing Indian Mountain, and on the profile it actually looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is. We got lucky, and it's actually graded really well. There's a ton of switchbacks in it, so it's really not a bad climb up to the top. We're a little worried because it is the first mountain that you come to on the Appalachian Trail that goes up over 5,000 feet of elevation. On day 18, we went from Carter Gap Shelter to Long Branch Shelter. Now, this is the day that we ended up going up and over Albert Mountain. And like I said before, Albert Mountain's extremely steep in the beginning going up, but it's a pretty pleasant walk down Albert Mountain.
I can't wait to get in that truck. Had some shit, so really easy. So yeah, we'll definitely do it.
So day 19, we just decided to hike from Long Branch Shelter down to Rock Gap. It's less than 4 miles. It gave us a short day to get into town. And while we were waiting on the public transportation that actually this time of year they run a shuttle, and it comes through 3 times a day, we were waiting on that, and a guy by the name of Ron Haven, who owns the Budget Inn here in Franklin, he has his own shuttle that he runs around, and he picked us up at no charge. Super nice guy. If you ever get a chance to meet him, definitely take advantage of being able to talk to him, pick his brain. He's all about helping hikers. He wouldn't take money from us, you know, even though we weren't staying at his place.
If you get to Wind and Stir, I do give rides from over there too. They're free. See, you remember the family that drinks together, though, gets drunk together. Franklin and an outer part of Franklin. It's sort of like, you know, the people from Michigan show you where they're at like that. Well, Franklin's like this. There's a downtown part that most hikers go to because you walk everything. But all these roads leading out to the interstate are communities of businesses there. So I run that shuttle out of town. You have an option of going out there and seeing some things in the evening too.
So that night we checked out the Lazy Hiker Brewing Company, which is actually a really cool little brewery in downtown Franklin. Very hiker friendly and very reasonably priced beers. I think it was like $4.50 for a pint, but it's all beer that they brew. It's good craft beer. Highly recommend going there.
Hiking over Albert Peak, and I got one thing on my mind. Exceeding a drop of water for the whole darn day, and I'm inclined to fight. Brother, take me home, those living waters flow.
All right, well, thanks for watching. Again, I'll update you at my next stop.